and that was one of a group of themes that were discussed at the recent Network Symposium, which was entitled Where To? The Future of Walking Arts, that was held at Falmouth University in April. And my focus here reflects my personal interest in this area of creative, critical walking practice, as well as the connections to notions of civic engagement, social justice, and applied practices across a range of disciplines which are of particular pertinence within this institution at present. So, to start at the beginning, walking as a mode of art practice could be said to have its roots in the Dada and Situationist movements of the early 20th century, with significant developments during the conceptual turn of the 1960s. A small number of visual arts practitioners known for their use of walking, such as Richard Long, Hamish Fulton, and Janet Cardiff, continued to establish the act of walking as art into the 21st century. Over the last 10 to 15 years, a much more extensive, rich, and interesting field has emerged, crossing disciplinary boundaries in the arts and beyond. So, out of this context, the Walking Artist Network was conceived of in 2007 with the artists Melissa Bliss, Clive Brandon, Viv Corringham, and my collaborators in the Walk, Walk, Walk project, Gail Burton and Serena Corder. And so our intention at the outset was to bring people together who define themselves as walking artists or who were interested in the idea of walking as a mode of art practice, to share examples of our practices and the work that inspired us, and to ask how we might define walking art as a medium and whether the attempt at that definition would be a fruitful method for generating discussion and debate. So, although that first event was very interesting and attracted quite a few people, it didn't move forward from there until 2011, when I came to work here and revived the idea of the network with my then colleague Mark Hunter through a successful AHRC networks bid. So the revived network operates for the most part through an active JISC list and a website including a growing directory of self-identified walking artists. The directory includes some 400 entries and represents members from backgrounds ranging from fine art, theatre and performance to dance, music and architecture, as well as those using walking in creative and critical ways, hailing from geography, history, anthropology and town planning, to name but a few. Although when we set out this number was a much more manageable 50 or so, it was still clear that this scale would be unwieldy for sustaining a research-led conversation, and to this end a smaller selected group of artists, researchers and cultural stakeholders was formed, taking forward the investigation of the project's key themes under the name Footwork. So the Footwork group met on 4 occasions through the funded life of the project. The first meeting, held alongside the Sideways Festival of Walking in Belgium in 2012, sought to maximise international networking potential by piggybacking onto an existing event that would attract an audience and participants with an interest in the network's themes. An invited group of 15 researchers and artists joined the final festival weekend, whose programme included a promenade performance, a symposium with keynotes from Tim Ingold and Jan Maschelein, and a walking laboratory, which I led. This workshop was devised using an open space approach, which places the onus of content on each participant. The approach is distinctive in that it does not decide an agenda in advance of the meeting. A broad overarching theme is defined, which participants then shape during the event according to their interest. In this version, after an initial discussion and the generation of points of interest to work on, participants took their ideas out for a walk, either as a space for discussion or in some cases as the articulation of the idea itself. I don't have time to describe each of our meetings in so much depth, but this first one is important because it set the stage, it set some key ideas in place for the ongoing work of the group. Firstly, that our discussions should be mobile, at least in part, that a group focusing on walking should walk, not sit and talk. And secondly, that the meetings should find a balance between a closed invited group and a free-form open space. So although we took a small invited group with us to Sideways, the benefits of the interaction with the wider festival community were great, and several invitations to join the research group were made through contacts there. The second and third meetings were just of the footwork group. So in June 2013, 16 of us spent a day walking along the Thames from UEL's Docklands campus to Dartford, followed by a day of discussion and reflection. In July 2014, the same group met at the Centre for Alternative Technology in Wales, tipping the focus of the meeting towards walking in relation to the environment and sustainability. To this end, Jess Allen, a performance artist and researcher, led a day-long walk along the route of her project, Tilting at Windmills, connecting the centre with a series of wind turbines in the local environment. Our final meeting was held in Cornwall in 2015 with two components, a footwork research group meeting followed by an open meeting in the form of a symposium delivered in collaboration with Falmouth University. So this final meeting and symposium enabled the group to articulate a series of research questions that had developed from the first three meetings and used these as a basis for the workshops of the meeting and as the call for papers for the symposium. So it's the third area here that I want to focus on, the politics of walking art. And to do that, I want to use some examples which are the ways that people responded to this thematic area of our call for papers. So some examples from the symposium. Jess Allen uses the term tractivism to describe her activist performance practice in rural landscape. All in a Day's Walk, for example, is a month-long performance in which Allen lives entirely within the distance she is able to walk away from her home in a day, sustaining herself only on the food that is grown, harvested, processed and obtainable within this distance. The project seeks to draw attention to loss, particularly of local food infrastructure, and to counter the disconnection that may lie at the root of wider environmental concerns. The walks are intended to facilitate conversational encounters, both with the people met randomly on the route or at pre-arranged destinations. So the walkers, the farmers, the growers, the millers, the bakers, the artisan cider producers. Dee Hedden and Sue Porter presented on their Walking into Connections project, which brings together self-identified disabled people with sustainability practitioners in a participatory action research project that uses shared walks as its key method. Using recordings made from the walk discussions, Hedden has created a 30-minute audio play which is now being used in a walk entitled Walk in Someone Else's Shoes, highlighting the different lived mobility experiences that people have even in seemingly everyday neutral circumstances, based on the disabled co-researchers' findings. The project has multiple outputs, not least of which is the raising of the visibility of disabled people as walkers. In Sharanya Murali's project, Deriving Delhi, she examines the various modes of pedestrian mobility a cross-section of lanes in Old Delhi can provide, asking how can viewing the derive as a practice of the city help to narrate local and global specificities of place. Her work highlights how the architectural context of post-war Europe that the derive was created out of and continues to predominantly remain within remains to be questioned and seeks to engage with the derive as a pedestrian activity that can be specific to and politically engaged with the vernacular architectures of Delhi. Phil Smith, my final example, argues for radical walking, answering no to the question, are the resistances of walking overstated? His prolific writing and making of walking works calls for a reclamation of pleasure in the use of public spaces and the defence of those spaces in the face of ongoing privatisation and commodification. Phil presented an anti-manifesto laying out what we are resisting and methods for resistant walking. These varied examples of practice, research, researchers' practice, and practice-based research strike me in several ways. Firstly, that although they use walking predominantly, they're not actually about walking in themselves. They have other issues at their core: food production and the rural economy, sustainability and disability, architecture and the narrative of post-colonial space, and the commodification of public space, especially in cities. The walking activates, engages, and enables the process and the products of these works, but it is more accurately described as a method or series of methods, a movement rather than a material, a set of practices rather than an artistic medium. Secondly, that they relate, and this is no insight but a statement of the obvious, to the discourse in contemporary arts around social engagement, participation, and relational practice. In her 2012 book, Artificial Hells, Participation in the Politics of Spectatorship, Claire Bishop describes the return to the social in art, stating that, I quote, "The work of art as a finite, portable, commodifiable product is reconceived as an ongoing or long-term project with an unclear beginning and end, while the audience, previously conceived as the viewer or beholder, is now repositioned as a co-producer or participant." Bishop problematises the dangerous alignment of the neoliberal, New Labour propagated inclusivity agenda in relation to the arts, in which ameliorative, publicly funded arts projects create submissive citizens, transform the image of public bodies, but fail to address underlying structural problems with genuinely, well, she contrasts that with genuinely engaged artists who are, and again I quote, less interested in a relational aesthetic than in the creative rewards of participation as a politicised working process, end quote. Whilst Nato Thompson, writing on socially engaged art, states, quote, "These cultural practices indicate a new social order, ways of life that emphasise participation, challenge power, and span disciplines ranging from urban planning and community work to theatre and live and the visual arts." As the title of his book, Living as Form, suggests, Thompson actively engages with a blurring of the boundaries between art and life, between art and activism, and between art and community projects. So what are my conclusions? A network is a frustrating project to try and draw conclusions from. The Where To symposium called for future visions and manifestos, but the majority of papers focused on the past projects, previous work. I know we must look backward to move forward, but I think my conclusion from the meeting is that the sphere of walking arts has become so wide-ranging, growing and shifting so quickly, that it is not an easy task to study it, and that studying it as a medium or a field, a mode of practice, is not what I want to do next. I'm not planning to leave walking behind, but I do want to think about how I forefront my own practice as research in my next project and pursue collaborations set in motion by the network. One of the tasks of the network's evaluation, still in hand, the tracking and reporting of the work that it has enabled, both within and beyond academia. I know already that this includes the commissioning of artworks, the instigation of an annual festival, the writing and publication of academic papers, and the instigation of PhD study is important in terms of looking at those next steps. One tangential strand that will continue is the CPAD-hosted series of seminars entitled Step by Step, and these have become an important offshoot from the network, making space in which I've drawn together research and artists whose work has common themes, but who would normally be unlikely to encounter one another's work. These have included, for example, the geographer Jenny Middleton speaking on her work on walking with visually impaired young people, the dancer and choreographer Sarah Wookey on her art walks for the Los Angeles Transit Authority, and me speaking about my Perambulator project, a participatory performance work with prams. These small thematic but transdisciplinary groupings feel full of potential both for future collaboration and the pursuit of new knowledge that relates to walking art and its interactions.
So as I said, if you could save your questions till the end, So, can I welcome Caroline Frostick, Adrian Renton and Derek Moore?
It's just me,
Just you, sorry. I wondered if the whole gang was going to be here.
I think Adrian's here somewhere. But
Yeah. So, Caroline is a research assistant in the School of Psychology.
I was in psychology, I'm now in the IHHD, so I've defected.
Oh, right, okay, join the institute,
Yeah.
so to speak. Okay. And the title of your paper is The Educational and Employment Aspirations of Adolescents from Areas of High Deprivation in London.
Good morning. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about a study that I've been working on for the last couple of years, first in psychology and now over in the IHHD, on the education and employment aspirations of adolescents from areas of high deprivation in London. So why are the aspirations of adolescents important? Well, studies over the last 10 years have shown that the education and occupational aspirations of adolescents are an increasingly significant predictor of their future success in both the job market and their achievements academically. And there's a general assumption over the past few years that children who come from sort of low SCS environments, low socioeconomic environments, or areas of high deprivation have correspondingly low aspirations for their future. And this quote from Sewell and Shah sort of sums it up. It is a sociological truism that children of higher social class origins are more likely to aspire to high educational and occupational goals than are children of lower social class origins. And in recent years, social policy has sought to improve the outcomes for these children by trying to raise their aspirations in the hope of increasing social mobility. So a bit more about aspirations and low SES. So while level of income is often thought to be the critical factor in determining aspirations, the literature now suggests that there are many other factors that can be more important in predicting outcomes. And recent reports have called for more robust, large-scale projects and research to help before we can start implementing interventions in this area. So what's different about our study? Well, we had a really unique data sample. As part of the World London Adolescent Survey, which I'll explain a bit more about in a moment, we were able to have access to this large population of adolescents from various different areas of deprivation in inner city London. As you can see, there were 1,214 adolescents took part, and they came from 20 different boroughs of London. And because of the nature of the data collection, we also collected a lot of information on other variables that are known or thought to have an effect on adolescent aspiration. So this is a breakdown of our population by ethnicity. As you can see, the Asian group was the largest, but actually that was broken down into Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi and other Asian. So the Well London study, I don't know if people have heard, some people might have heard of the Well London study because it's been running for a very long time and UEL has been involved since the start. But it originated as the Greater London Authority's 9 million flagship project on health. And the idea was to implement wellbeing initiatives into these various areas of high deprivation in London. 20 boroughs took part, and each of the boroughs had two small areas that were matched for deprivation called LSOAs, which I think is an economist term, of about 5 or 6 streets each. And one of the LSOAs was an intervention LSOA and one was a control LSOA. And the kind of interventions put in place were mental health, healthy eating, improving green spaces, cultural activities, and each of the areas had a community cafe with the local residents to get some idea of what they felt was going to be helpful to their communities. Now, the adolescent survey was the evaluation of the adolescent side of all this. So we did a baseline data collection and we did a follow-up data collection after the interventions took place. And the Aspirations project has come out of the baseline data that we collected. So what did we do? Well, the data collection took place between January 2008 and July 2009. All of the adolescent participants were between the ages of 11 and 16 years. And they were, as I said, they were identified because they came from one of these areas of deprivation, one of the 40 LSOAs. And we recruited them and surveyed them through their schools. So using National Pupil Database information, we could work out where they went to school, and that's how we contacted them and carried out the survey in the classroom. And I have to say the biggest challenge of this project was trying to get schools to take part in the research, trying to convince them that it was a worthwhile project to do, because obviously teachers are very, very busy people. In these schools in particular, there were lots of challenges, other challenges. And there was no immediate kind of obvious reward to the pupils by taking part in this. But we did succeed, and we got 68 schools to take part in the baseline study. And of course, when we went in to talk to the children and to do the survey with the children, they were representative from all different year groups and different classes. So it really was quite a nightmare to organise, trying to get them all into one room at the same time. The research tool was a questionnaire. It took about 45 minutes to complete and was divided into 6 sections. These included measures of physical activity, mental health, general health, home and school environment, and obviously demographics. And for this particular study, we measured 3 domains of aspiration. So we had some aspiration questions relating to future aspirations, and we divided them into 3 domains of school aspirations, higher educational aspirations, and occupational aspirations. We also looked at possible associations with a range of other factors, like gender, ethnicity, age, psychological well-being, school perception, peer relationships, school conduct, family conflict, and parental support for education. This is a bit more detail, sorry this doesn't come out very well, but there's a bit more detail about our 3 domains of aspiration that we were looking at. So the first one, the school educational aspirations, the questions were, I want to be successful in my schoolwork and achieve good qualifications. I expect to get good grades in my GCSEs. I see myself staying on at school or college, and I see myself studying to do A-levels. And the adolescents got to choose 1, 2 or 3, not true, somewhat true, certainly true. So the highest score of aspiration would have been a 3. For our higher educational aspiration domain, it was just 1 question. I see myself going to university. And for the final domain, employment aspirations, I expect to eventually get a well-paid job. I think with my abilities I will find it easy to get a good job. And our hypothesis was really that actually aspirations would be generally high across the group, in contrast to previous assumptions, but supporting more recent research in the area. I'll say a bit about the statistical analysis very briefly, because I'm not a statistician, so don't ask me any difficult stats questions. But because the primary sampling unit was at the neighbourhood level, it was necessary to use a multi-level modelling to analyse the data. And we also used multiple imputation for missing data, so that we could increase power, reduce potential response bias, and also we really wanted to try and include those pupils that struggled most to complete the questionnaire. So some of them didn't quite make it to the end in the time, and we wanted their data as much as anybody else's. So this is what we found for the aspiration domains, and as you can see, they were, as we thought, quite high across all 3 of the domains. And we also had found some other findings. So girls reported higher educational but not occupational aspirations than boys, and this is well supported in the literature. And although our occupational questions were not hugely detailed, other research has shown that girls tend to go for jobs with a high gender identity over sort of jobs that maybe boys are more likely to fall into. The white British group reported lower educational and occupational aspirations than other ethnic groups, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Perceived parental support for education had the largest positive association with aspirations, and again this is well documented in the literature. And our most unexpected finding was that aspirations were found to be negatively associated with perceptions of school environment and peer relationships. And this is completely in contrast to previous literature on the subject. So this is just a bar chart showing our second domain, so the future aspiration to go to university by ethnic group. And you can see male and female. You can see the white British group is quite low. And a bit more on ethnicity. There's been some interesting research into the area of ethnicity and aspirations. Rothen concluded that social class operates in a similar way for all ethnic groups without a specifically ethnic effect. And other research has shown that it seems to be the ethnic population that remains in the area of high deprivation for longest has the lowest aspirations. And that would fit with what we found, because we would probably expect the white British population to have been in these areas of high deprivation in London for longer than some of the other ethnic groups. Another interesting finding is that the increase in Eastern European children into the UK schools from 2004 has actually benefited the existing school populations by raising standards, and the authors suggest that they may have a more favourable characteristics than the existing population, with highly educated parents who are strongly attached to the labour market. And actually I have a memory of one of the very first schools I ever went into in Brent, I think it was. I was watching 40 children fill out this survey, and there was a little girl at the back of about 11 or 12 who seemed to be reading at the same time. So I asked the teacher, I whispered to the teacher, what's she doing? And he said to me, oh, well, she's Polish, she only arrived in the country 3 months ago, she doesn't speak a word of English, and she's doing brilliantly. And sure enough, this child managed to hand in her questionnaire before some of the other children, and she's been looking everything up in her Polish-English dictionary on the way. So, as I said, our most unexpected finding from the study was that school perception and school peer relationships were significant in their negative association with aspiration outcomes. And previous work, mainly in the US, has completely contradicted this, and they found that the more connected children are to their school environment and their peer groups, the higher their aspirations. So this sort of begs the question, what is it that's different about the UK state school environments? And I'd be very interested to hear if anybody has any ideas on this. We thought that it's possible that if the adolescents in our sample with the most positive perception of school are highly regarded and successful amongst their peers, they might lack an appreciation of the actual academic effort required to achieve a similar level of success beyond school. And actually there is research that suggests that a balanced self-schema, whereby you have both a hoped-for high-achieving possible self, and a feared low-achieving possible self of being unemployed with few prospects, is actually the most effective at promoting future success. Obviously there were limitations to the study, as with most studies. I suppose the major limitation to this study was that the data wasn't collected specifically with this study in mind. So, as I said before, it came from the Well London Adolescent Survey, which gave us this fantastically large and diverse sample of adolescents and lots of variables to look at, but the questions weren't designed for this study in mind. The questionnaire relied on self-report measures only, so we didn't get any feedback from parents or teachers, so that could have had an impact on our results. And also, I suppose, a big one with kind of children and working with adolescents is that while the adolescents were identified at the community level from the area that they lived, the roads that they came from, but they were measured, they took the survey at school, and also school is obviously a huge part of their community, and this wasn't really taken into account in the study. And also adolescents may well travel outside of their community to go to school, particularly in the case of faith schools, and mix with an entirely different population. So, future social policy. So we have this paradox of high aspiration versus low achievement. If aspirations in low SES adolescents are high but achievement is still low, when and how do you intervene? And again, any thoughts from anybody would be interesting. Thought maybe that given that parents retain such a strong influence beyond early childhood in terms of aspirations, it might be effective to focus on parental attitudes towards education as an early intervention before their children reach adolescence. Another possibility could be to develop strategies that help to convince underachieving adolescents that academic success is an important contributor to personal success beyond the school gates. And DeWitt et al. Suggest that it's not the aspirations of low SCS adolescents that need to be raised, but the gap between aspiration and achievement within communities, so a community level intervention as opposed to individual or school level. And I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So our final speaker is Joe Thomas. Joe is a London-based composer. Her work explores human fallibility and perfection through sound, noise and glitch. Joe teaches sound design and music composition at UVL. Have I got that one? Yeah. The title of Joe's paper is Fem, Use, Tech and Community Interventions.
I'm going to sit down for this project because so I'll just sit down here. Welcome to you all. It's really nice to be presenting here today, and an honour to speak about the civil engagement project, Fem Use Tech. Fem Use Tech was a project to engage women in Stratford promoting gender equality in music, composition and technology. The Instagram, the slide that you can see here is an Instagram feed which was put together by students. So it represents the diverse and creative landscape the project was trying to capture. And here you can see the names of the team and the Twitter feed, which was also student-led. The project hosted a very creative team, and the student body were extremely talented. They were involved in building and inspiring the mould of the project with their own ideas and approaches to working, while guided by myself as a director. When building the project for initial application for funding, I decided that I needed partners to maximise its impact across the schools, university and community. The partners in this project were the Schools of Arts and Digital Industries, Athena's One, the Gender Equality Charter, the Fuel Festival and St John's Church in Stratford. The relationship between the partners and the project changed depending on which stage we were at through the project. The approach was one which was fluid and transparent. Athena Swan held meetings between St John's Church and myself at various stages through the project, and I was in regular contact with Creative Commons, press and the finance team from Arts and Digital Industries throughout the project. And here you can see Victoria and Joy, who were workshop leaders on the project, and they were gospel leaders. Actually, they were fantastic, and they ran gospel workshops. They ran gospel workshops for 4 to 6 weeks in St John's Church. The project was designed to run for 3 months. I'm a composer, and as a composer, I have worked on community-led projects. I felt excited about integrating my professional experience into the project. My field is within the digital arts, focusing on sound, composition, and interdisciplinary work. The concept of this project came from 4 main points. I need to address low female student numbers and retention in our music department, a series of life learning events teaching women in the music technology over the past few years in East London, the work of Professor Georgina Bourne and the Music Big Project from Oxford, and civic work which I've been doing both in the UK and internationally. Yeah. In 2011, I worked with the Osmani School in Hackney, the Whitechapel Gallery, and the software company Ableton. It was a female-led project working with a group of young female composers. This project in particular inspired me for the planning of venues tech. On this slide, one can see civic project work which was done in the Hayward Gallery with David Tube's Sonic Boom as well, and music which I facilitated with the Port and Call project with Toby Butler in 2008. More recently, on an international level, my digital sound installation, Rocco, commissioned by Contemporary Locus, an Italian art organisation, was part of an engagement project, and that put together a children's lab which extended out to the wider community, led through art history held in the Villa de Rocco Bergamo. The work of Georgina Bourne was a significant influence on this project. Georgina Bourne came to the University of East London in 2011, and we were part of an ethnographical study on digital landscapes and the UK sound art scene. She studied several universities across the UK, looking at teaching, subjects, software, and interviewing students and staff. Her recently completed PhD student, Patrick Villan, did significant research on gender ratios from her studies, finding that the majority of UK music technology departments hold ratios of 90-10. Our ratio is 90% male and 10% female. And to put this in perspective, we have nearly 200 students in music. This makes female presence very low in the music architectural space. Mindful of these issues, inspirations, and questions, I set out to create 3 digital spaces in Stratford. The first space would be a series of compositional workshops, the gospel workshops, with gospel leaders that were led by the students of East London. In these workshops, they used mobile phone technology as part of composing with the young people. The young people were digital natives. The second space was a series of public performances and research talks, also led in St John's Church, Stratford, about women, music technology, gender equality, community and leadership. For the public lectures, we invited academics, artists, and we had female students discussing their own music and current issues around music. And the third space would be a social network-driven space with focused narrative thread. We used Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and the threads were women, music technology, diversity, and community. In regards to diversity, I really wanted this project to be inclusive of music genre. I really wanted it to be inclusive of sexuality. And we made it quite obvious that we were inclusive of sexuality. And we had airtime on Queer House Radio, which is based in the Roundhouse. And we had links to social media and artists that were presenting. I really wanted the project to be inclusive of musical dexterity, and we were in touch with the Drake Music organisation, which are an organisation that work with disabled people, and they came to our meetings, and they're very interested in now holding partnerships and working with us. alongside our students and in Stratford. I really wanted the work of the project to be inclusive of women in colour, race and ethnicity, and we had points in the project where students really focused on that in the Instagram feeds and the Twitter feeds and Facebook feeds. And I wanted the project to be inclusive of women with families. So I kind of set out to target Mumsnet in Hackney and in East London, and target the Women's Institute held in East London. We did this through Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, kind of really working social media. The project to be really inclusive of music practices which were industry-led and community group-led. And we did that through working with and inviting with several different groups. So we've invited POS and Music for Youth, and inclusive of age. And so we looked into contacting the Waitrose Pastoral Club, and they have bases in East London. And it was quite, they were advertising our programme through their Twitter feeds, and that was really, really important. So the project actually reached a whole spectrum of different types of women across the board. I did focus groups in Stratford Library in the Saturday Morning Club about this project, and I was working with mums, dads and very young children. My students had airtime on East London Radio, and they had like programs, the whole program on New Radio, so yeah. Going back to the work in the church, I asked the church, first of all, when I started planning the project, what they needed, and they said that they needed a gospel leader to work with the young people, and it would be interesting for them to work with the young people with gospel leader. They wanted to create a networking exchange, and they wanted to add to the young people's experience base, and that was something that they wanted to do. And the relationship that we had with the church was very reciprocal, because they were reciprocal to the availability of space, placements, and community activities. So we could use the church for free and go there, and we've got we have a very good network now set up with our students. It's really, really good. And if I go, yeah, this is Joy working with the young people in a children's concert that was held in April, just after Easter, on the songs and work that they'd actually been singing and working together with, and it was really, I mean, it was pretty stunning, and they worked. They performed 2 songs, and then that was part of a really, really big concert. Okay, and then we go, yeah. Now, I just want to talk about the the network that we also did, which was to work with the lectures and performances, and so we had students performing, and we invited artists and academics, and that was very separate after the Sunday school activities had happened. And this is singer-songwriter Jenna Bailey performing in the research talks before the actual talks started.
Jen.
Yeah, cool. Okay. And then here is Jude Gosling, and she is a local artist, and she was part of the discussion and debate and panel speaker, and she is seen here in Queen Elizabeth Park, and she discussed digital technology, music dexterity, the use of assistive technology, and to make her own music, and her work, which was designed for the Wellcome Trust, and she's a Wellcome Fellow. Yeah. And now I just want to go through our project outcomes. Our outcomes were that we developed a network with the church and community, which is now being sustained. We have started to develop a buddy scheme in performing arts and music, and we're going to start developing that this coming term, which will hopefully do something to tackle retention in the school of women in music. And this may be part of an impact study. The internship scheme with the church is being discussed, and young children are going from the S building, going to the S building to record their works in the music studios over the summer. And, yeah.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, thank you.
How do we do on chairs?
Yep, I've got some chairs outside.
Okay, so I'm not sure how this is going to work for camera purposes, but I was hoping that we could all come and sit down here. Carolyn, Joe, and Claire.
Thanks.
Hopefully we've got some more chairs.
Yeah.
These ones are stuck to the ground.
Yeah, this one's a start. So, when we were, please, some of you sit,
Some people sit, go on.
musical chairs. So when we were doing the selection for papers for the conference, we were really trying to bring different disciplines and practices together. And I think that it's clear there's a lot of commonality, or a lot of, I think, sort of methods and practices and research crossovers here. So I'd very much like to invite you to sort of address questions that maybe all three people can answer, not just one of the panellists that you've heard today. And maybe I certainly was struck by some of the recurring ideas around mobility and aspiration, and some interesting kinds of sort of different findings around gender and mobility and aspiration. So I wonder, let's open it up, because we've only got about 20 minutes. I'll squeeze over here. If anybody has an opening question for one or all of our presenters today.
Can I just ask, James John, we're working student support, student experience manager. Are there lessons and questions in the three of you really that you could take from what you've done that you think we could use for students on campus in a more general way?
I suppose on a very practical level, absolutely, yes. Do you mean, for example, within my I teach a module called Performing the City, in which we use case studies of walking art practices that are located geographically near to where we are, and we explore those, and then students create their own walking works that explore connecting theories that relate to urban life. But do you mean on a more kind of pragmatic level and engaging students with
Yeah, you're taking it outside of the subject area, looking at students more generally to bring them into the...
One of the first projects that I did when I started working at UEL as an hourly paid lecturer was part of a module called Public Project 1, and the first activity that I asked students to do was to take one another on a guided walk to their favourite place in the campus, and by doing that as a group we spent 3 hours walking from one person's place to the next person's place, and they would explain why that was their favourite place.
I think it was really interesting for the students to work on a project and working on a research project or a civic engagement project is different from working on assignments. Because actually, and there's kind of a different type of commitment that's required. And if one person goes out, then it really is problematic for the whole team, and that's, I think that is actually what my students learn. Actually, so teamwork is really, really important. And working together and working and taking. We had like very. I told the students that we had to be really careful about anything that was put on social media in respect of swearing and stuff like that, and there was to be no nudity and because it would be really problematic, and we were working with the church actually, so they had to that was and they were really good because they didn't try any of that. So
Didn't get the clothes.
no.
Caroline, I wonder if you wanted to respond.
I don't know in terms of interventions you could do with maybe UEL students, but I suppose in terms of aspiration, they're obviously, I would assume, fairly high aspiring bunch of people in the first to have moved on from school and gone to university and further education in the first place. I suppose something that might be quite interesting in relation to our findings might be how they feel about their connection to UEL and the university that they're at and their future progress, and how that affects their identity in some ways. I mean, I would be surprised if it was similar to the schools that less connected students feel at school, the more they aspire. I would have thought that university is a very different kind of state of affairs, but that could be something to find out about.
Could I just ask you a question on that? Because John mentioned this morning about how word of mouth, it doesn't matter how much marketing the university does, word of mouth is a big factor. And we know that this university is always pulled from its locality. Does the role of the university in the community, or universities in their communities, fall within your research to see how it affects aspiration, knowing that I could go there? Do you see what I mean?
I'm sure it can only be a positive thing. I mean, we didn't specifically ask questions about either UEL or kind of which university, or does it make a difference. But I think having a university like UEL in the neighbourhoods like this can only be a positive thing, especially with all the civic engagement and the reaching out that's going on at the moment.
It strikes me actually, Caroline, that could be quite interesting to follow on, to look at students who might specifically come from some of those areas that you've studied, who are here at UEL, and how their kind of impact in their communities might affect aspirations or their peers and their siblings and their kind of networks' perceptions of higher education.
One of the reasons I set up this project was because I had a student last year who is from this area, and she was leaving, and she wrote gospel music, and she was working with technology, and she couldn't afford to go to the masters, do a masters. She was doing, she wanted to join a group of people that compose gospel music, and she really wanted to carry on her composition. But she wanted to be involved in a women's group because of her beliefs, and we couldn't find one. And we looked everywhere, actually, and she was it was really, really important. I felt that it was really important to deal with that, actually. Why isn't there a women's group in Stratford? Why? Why isn't there a women's group that does music in Stratford? So I really want to, ask that question and set one up. But I couldn't do it last year, but I really wanted to try and do it this year in some way. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Okay. The theme that I've noticed actually with also all three presenters is actually on the line of aspiration, achievement, identity, and engagement in a sense. Well, I'm a learning achievement assistant, and I would say that's what I was speaking from the themes that you spoken about. Something interesting that Caroline, you said was the gap between aspiration and achievement needs to be raised. And I'd like to ask, in your research, did you find it was more of maybe those high aspirations, but maybe the achievement is what was letting the students down, or was it the other way? So that's maybe what I would like to ask. And maybe for Joe and for Joanne Thomas, I'd like to ask, you spoke about raising engagement and low attention. That was one of the purpose for your research. The students that you involved, how many were actually involved? Maybe was it a module? And how did you see the change in retention and engagement?
Well, we haven't seen that actually. So that's what we haven't seen any change in retention yet because the project's just happened. We want to set up a buddy scheme in performing arts, and that might see a change of retention, but it would have to be looked at over a period of time through an impact study. But the engagement, the change of engagement, we saw almost automatically, is sort of instantly, because as soon as I was working with a sort of a group of students on their dissertations, and then as soon as I sort of put this project together, the students were more engaged towards their work and doing. I think they felt like they were doing something. They were getting paid for it as well. I mean, it was paid work. It was professional work outside in the community, and that's really, really, really important to do if you're doing music. That's absolutely where it lies for creative people. So it was almost instantly.
So I think you're asking about aspirations versus achievements.
Yes.
So I guess what came out of our study was that children from these areas of high deprivation do have really high aspirations for their future. They want to achieve. So the problem doesn't seem to be in kind of raising aspirations, and there has been some more recent research that backs that up as well. So I guess it then becomes about kind of what's going wrong between these high aspirations and these children growing up and actually achieving their dreams and going on to get good jobs or into further education. and there's obviously work that needs to be done in that area, but hopefully it helps to know where the gap is.
Any other questions?
Could I ask a question to myself and to the other panellists as well, which is about the kind of the tensions between, in our working lives, between the different roles that we fulfill in the university in terms of teaching and research and civic engagement, and how we might try to draw a more holistic picture from these projects and these presentations that perhaps can speak to ensuring, and I think Joe's project probably does it already really demonstrably, but how the research fits holistically with the teaching and with the sort of future movement of the university. I don't know, Caroline, whether you just work as a researcher
I or am
whether
just
you're
a researcher, actually.
in teaching as well.
I don't teach, so I am just a reader. I do the odd sort of seminar, but no, I don't have a teaching load.
Right. But I'm wondering if, because it's interesting, these different disciplines coming together here in this panel, but seeing how you're finding some way down the line result in public engagement workshops trying to address these disparities and differences. Do you see what I mean? That it's interesting to see how you're picking up the
and your
issues.
research expertise feels so relevant to my task in the classroom of working with students who have aspirations but don't have the best in terms of they've scraped in, but they need a lot of help to pull their skill set together so that they can now achieve in higher education, and that feels like a very real challenge in my working life, and one that I'm trying really hard to connect with my research work, my artistic practice, my researcher's practice, with all of those facets. But I think.
I mean, I guess my feeling on this is that, going back to something I touched on, this idea of this kind of self-schema of being able to identify yourself as being high achieving is really important, and also that kind of fear of not achieving to some extent. I mean, I think that resonates with me. That feels like something that is quite important, and I guess there is also a difference between aspirations and expectations. So while children might aspire to do really well, they also may not expect to do so well if it's not something that's usual from their family or their community. So I suppose maybe working on children's being able to actually see themselves, visualise themselves in these positions, as well as having a kind of general realistic realisation that actually this is important for success in the future.
But a project like Joe's, to me, seems to do that by both taking our students into the community and enabling them to see that they're capable of working on a professional level, but also by bringing those young people into the university and enabling them to see that they could come and study and work in this environment.
My students that were working on the project, some of them were actually working on a professional level anyway. So, and they were very... I feel that they're high achieving students and very talented.
But I bet your project has reconfirmed that for them and helped them to really see that as being confirmed by being paid, being taking the project.
We had one thing that I thought was important to do was we had a focus on sound engineering, and I think there's one I was working with. I think there's one at the Gender Equality Charter, and they had a sound engineering, women's sound engineering day, and I asked one of my students to be the sound engineer for the project, and she'd never been a sound engineer, and that was really interesting to do that.
To give her that responsibility.
To give her that responsibility and experience. That was good.
Okay, I think we have time for one or two more questions. Jonathan?
I've got lots of questions, but in the spirit of your wanted to collective one. Actually, just before I say that, just on Claire's point, my halfpenny on that would be that there are inherent tensions between self-organisation, however managed by the individual holistically, and a bureaucratic organisation such as university. Perhaps the future is really a permission-led space, some of which arises from winning grants and so on. But there are other forms of permission that will allow academics to try and juggle those different conflicting demands. I mean, Joe's, the time to invest, as you did, is remarkable, actually, in the context of some of those bureaucratic demands. But my question was about media support. I'm just one takeaway we might take is how, in your various projects, did you get assistance from the comms centre? Was that helpful? Do you have recommendations? Because, for instance, right at the moment, all the talk about a lack of women on stages of summer festivals, Joe's research connects very well. Claire's work, just to get in my other question if I had time, I'm really interested in the tensions between individual and collective.
Yeah.
The Manchester Ramblers and all of those early walking activists.
Yeah.
But all of that is about amplifying the message, organising in some way, so promotion. And for Carolyn's, to get in my other squeeze, the other thing that's really interesting, that the children presumably reflected the fact that recession was just kicking off, and that some generations of poor families had had 3 waves going back to the early 80s, the 90s, and just then. And that must have impacted, so maybe that's another consideration. Anyway, so the question is, how was media support? Did it help you? And do you have any recommendations for how that could be built on for people doing your kind of work in the future?
From the university?
Yeah.
Non-existent. Oh. I would say. I had to say it was a constant battle to make anything happen. And I should, with live streaming, so I won't say any more than that.
Thanks.
I had fantastic support actually from Creative Commons, and actually I had fantastic support all the way through the project from everyone in the university. It was absolutely brilliant. I was working very hard from the start in creating contacts and networks. But Kira Hayes, we set up meetings, and we had very good planned meetings, and we had a schedule where things would go out, specific sort of targets to meet. We had a poster campaign. I worked with fashion. And Gemma Whitfield, one of our students, she was sitting in one of these meetings, setting them up, and it was fantastic. It was really, really good. It took so much time, but it was great to do. And then the Creative Commons team came to the church for this concert, that you saw a photo of, and that was absolutely beautiful, and some of it was recorded. But we had to be very, very careful about what we showed and what we didn't, because we were working with children, and I didn't want the church the church sent us photos
Perhaps I should.
To use, and they were.
You're going to change your
I should qualify the fact that things have changed significantly in the institution since I began my project over 3 years ago, whereas Joe's project began just early this year.
Caroline?
Well, I'll sort of tread a middle ground if I can and say that I personally didn't have any dealings with the comms team. I don't know if they were involved in the Well London project as a whole. It's entirely possible given how huge it is. So, I can't really comment on it too much. But if I've got time just to answer you, to say something about the other thing you said about the change that was going into recession, and so the two times we went to do data collection with this group of adolescents, there was a 4-year gap between the baseline survey where we got that data for that study and the follow-up survey, and in between there was the Olympic regeneration, there was the recession, there was schools turning into academies, the Building Schools for the Future programme. So pretty much everything that you can throw at communities was happening. And I have to say that when I went back to the same schools 4 years later to do the follow-up, I would often just drive past the school because it had changed beyond recognition for the better. You know, kind of old Victorian buildings with chicken wire around the outside were replaced with space-age buildings, and it had a huge impact on the kids as well. They were same demographic of kids, but very different in the classroom. So quite a positive change.
Okay. We have time for one last question. Anybody has one? Okay. Well, let's. Thank you very much. It's very interesting, very stimulating. That gives us a sort of 5 minutes to grab a coffee before the next. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. I have never ever known about your work.